Okay, so this is the first time I'm going to try to do this. And I'm going to talk about some things that I've read, um, some literature, and I want to talk today about um, something that dates back to antiquity. And it's a Middle English poem, and it's in this book, um, the Middle English Breton Lays. um, and it's called Sir Orfeo. Um, Sir Orfeo is written in Middle English, and I don't know so much about Middle English, um, but this dates to around, I think, the 1300s, and uh, it comes from um, originally the story is very similar to an ancient Greek myth, of a god. It was called Orpheus, and Orpheus was um, out of this mythology book. Um, Orpheus was very famous for two things mainly. He was famous for his harp playing, and his bravery. Um, and it's kind of hard to kind of determine how old this myth is, but it seems like it comes from 7th century BC, which would make it um, nearly over 2,500 years old, or nearly 3,000 years old. Um, but the first appearance of the Orpheus myth in literature is from around 250 BC. So in this myth, Orpheus is um, a um, harp player, and he when he plays his music is so incredible that nature stops. Basically, he attracts animals, and it's mesmerizing. Basically, um, so he has a wife, and you know, in Greek mythology, it's always a danger that another god is going to show up and do you harm. And in this case, um, uh, his wife Eurydice gets kidnapped by Hades, um, and she's taken to hell, and Orpheus tries to get her back. So, of course, he's famous for not only his music but his bravery. So he's only the second hero to go into hell. Um, he goes to hell, and he finds her, and his music is so incredible that Persephone, Hades' wife, convinces Hades to give the man's wife back. Well, Hades agrees, but with one condition, um, that uh, if Orpheus looks back at his wife on the way out, he has to lead her out of hell. If he looks back at her, then he will lose her. Well, Orpheus agrees, and in order to navigate out of hell, he plays music, and his wife Eurydice follows it. Um, and he gets out, and he turns around to see if his wife has gotten out too, and she hasn't. She's still at the precipice. Um, and when he sees her, Hades comes and pulls her back, and so Orpheus is saddened, and he wonders, um, you know, the world playing his music, which I think becomes sad. Well, that's the old myth, but Sir Orfeo is a little bit similar. It's about a god. I mean, sorry, it's about a king um, who also loses his wife to fairies, a fairy king. So, and in Sir Orfeo, um, the um he doesn't play a harp, but he plays maybe a lute, I think. Um, he he loses his wife, um, and she goes to um, hell, basically, or this fairy king. And in Sir Orfeo, he kind of travels the forest for 10 years, and he gets glimpses of her. And um, the wife's name is a little bit different. It's Herodis. Um, so let me read, if you don't, this is a little bit interesting. Middle English, this is something that I'm not very good at, but let me try. I'm just going to read maybe the first. Um, I'm going to read from, um, let's see, the third stanza, about line 39. Orfeo was a king in England on high lording, a stalwart man and hardibo, large and courteous he was also. His father was Colman of King Pluto, and his mother of King Juno, that sometime where as goddess he hold, for adventure that I did untold. This king sojourned in Thracian, that was a city of noble defence, for Winchester was cleped though Thracians without to know. Um, so what does this mean? Basically, Orfeo was a king in England. And it immediately goes to Greek mythology, talking about his father came from King Pluto, which is Hades in Greek mythology. Pluto is Roman, I believe. And I could be wrong. His mother was Juno, was of King Juno, so another god, goddess, actually. Um, but this is kind of deceptive, I think. And when I had to write a paper on this, and when I was going through, I actually wrote out every single line in the Middle English, try to get an idea of what this is about. And to me, it's a little bit difficult to understand because it's 605 around 605 lines, which isn't that big for some of these lays, which lays are basically the spoken poem. Um, but it was for me. It was kind of um, I wasn't sure if Herodes was dead because she's described when he she first gets attacked in under the tree, and she has two maidens there. She gets attacked, but she's actually in a dream, and so during the dream, something happens. She wakes up and she's scratching her face, um, and the two maidens run and get Orfeo. Uh, he goes and gets her, and she describes how um, the fairy king came to her and showed her his kingdom and told her that the next day he would bring her back, but the next day he was gonna get her. Um, so it was really troubling. And when Orfeo went to get her, she was pale and she looked like death. Um, so I don't know why he brought her back to that same place where she was kidnapped. In her dreams, she was kidnapped. But he did. He brought her back. And, uh, while they were there, she was kidnapped right uh, before him. Like somehow there's like this gate where this tree is, and um, it's a little bit wicked actually, uh, and that's how he loses her. Um, and so after he loses her, he gives up his kingdom and he travels around, and he just becomes wild. And this is what's interesting to me is he gives his kingdom to a steward, and he doesn't really say that he's going to go look for her, but he does. He just I think basically he's given up on getting her. But he starts to change, and he grows a beard, and he eats things of the earth, and he reminisces about what he had. I'm going to read from 40. But ever he liveth in great malaise. He that had y word the foe and grease, and on bed the purple bliss. Now on hard het he lit, with levis and grace he him reached. He that had castles and tours, River, forest, fleet with floors. So he lived in a really with grief, and uh, his hair became gray. His clothes, everything. Uh, he covered himself with leaves and grass, and then he starts thinking that he had castles and towers, rivers, forests full of flowers. Um, and what's interesting about this passage is that this passage reappears later when he goes. Sorry, this passage is how actually his wife describes uh, the fairy king's land when he takes her from the dream. Um, she describes the exact same thing, basically, that he had towers and um, fields of flowers. Um, so it was very interesting. Um, and that's on line 159. So the fairy king showed her castles and towers, again, rivers, forests full of flowers. Um, yeah, so when I read that, I was starting to think these two people are maybe the same person. Um, that Orfeo is the fairy king. And so this is early on, like the first third of the poem. So when it got to, I guess as the poem went on, that was kind of the conclusion that I came to, is that it's kind of a journey into um, his psyche. Um, and, for me, that's what's interesting about this literature, is that there's many levels, and we can read it many ways. The purpose of my paper was to come up with some kind of original research, original idea, and not consult the research. So I tried not to think about the stuff that I'd read about Sir Orfeo, but I'm not quite sure if there's anything written about that, of him maybe being, the fairy king, and Orfeo, and even Herodes. There are three parts of the same person. Um, so, but yeah. Anyway, I recommend this poem because uh, it's very interesting. It's what some medievalists. I'm not a medievalist, but people that know about this literature, Middle English. It's a synthesis of many different cultures, and this is Sir Fair is a great example of it. Drawing on the famous myth of the hero, Orpheus, the hero, Greek hero, and also bringing in fairy, like Celtic um, kind of folklore. So yeah, I recommend this, and yeah. Anyway, thanks for listening.